My friends, I built my practice to about $1 million a year working largely on my own. I had one support person and I didn't really have any support network. And my journey from $1 million to $2 million and my journey from $2 million to an eight-figure exit, I can hugely attribute to building and running masterminds. Now, the idea of masterminds is nothing new. The concept has been talked about for over 100 years, but they're not necessarily easy to start. It took me a lot of trial and error to get my masterminds put together. And in this video, I'm going to run through the 11 steps or the 11 rules I use when running my masterminds that you can use to build your own masterminds. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Matthew Jarvis. As I mentioned, built a $2 million a year practice, which I recently exited for 8 figures. And now I make videos like these to help advisors like yourself match or even exceed my success. So here are the 11 rules I go by when it comes to running masterminds, of which I've run now dozens, but probably pushing close to 50 masterminds. So rule number one, or strategy number one, is like you individually, I have to be very, very committed to the value of a mastermind. Putting together masterminds is a lot of work. It takes time, it takes money, it takes commitment, it takes disappointment, it takes rejection. You've got to be really committed that having a mastermind will transform your life and your practice. Now, if you're not that committed, join someone else's. Now, this leads us to number 2. Assume that no one's going to invite you to their mastermind. Maybe this is just me. I had always hoped that someone would invite me to their mastermind and no one ever did. Maybe that's me. Maybe that says something about me. I don't know. If you're getting invited to masterminds all the time, congratulations. The only masterminds I get invited to are ones that cost money, which is fine. There's actually a lot to be said for that because, as I mentioned in rule number 1, you have to be really committed to the value. And a lot of times the value is a lot easier to commit to if it's just writing a check versus booking your own. But let's assume that you haven't found one that you want to join and you haven't been invited to any. So how do you go about this process of forming your own mastermind? So this takes us to step number 3, which is ask everyone that you even mildly like or respect if they're interested in forming a mastermind. When I kicked off my first mastermind, I found an article that Michael Kitces had written on kitces.com talking about the value of masterminds, and I forwarded it to everyone I could possibly know, and I posted it on forums, and I reached out to lots of people to see if anyone else was willing to start a mastermind. I was a little bit surprised, but now it makes sense that no one in my local area was willing to start a mastermind. And I think what that was is that we're a little bit concerned that if I tell someone else how I'm running my business, they will somehow steal my clients. Now, my philosophy on that is if you end up with one of my clients, you deserve them because I messed up and you're doing something incredibly well. But not everyone shares that abundance mindset. As such, you'll often have better luck reaching outside of your geographical area, especially if you're in your geographical area outside of your immediate niche or your immediate industry. And so I invited all sorts of people. The very first person that joined one of my masterminds, a phenomenal advisor, Matthew Doherty. He is in the Cleveland, Ohio area. He saw a post I had made on the FBA forum asking if anyone wanted to start a mastermind. And he was the only one of the entire nation of financial advisors that reached back out and said, yeah, I'd like to. So initially our mastermind, it was just him and I, and we would meet virtually over Zoom once a month, and we would compare notes and we would share ideas. And that was the origins of our mastermind. This leads us into rule number 4, which virtual can work, but you won't get the same traction until you're meeting in person. And so Matt Doherty and I, we met online several times and did Zoom meetings, but it wasn't until our mastermind started going in person that we started seeing really transformative changes. Now, you can play around with what configuration works best for you. I like to do 2 to 4 physical events in person each year. Now, not everyone in your group will be able to make every event, which is why it's nice to have a group of 5 to 10, but I'm going to structure 2 to 4 a year and meeting in person, specifically meeting in person where you all share an Airbnb. We've tried it in hotels. I let you know, I probably tried this everywhere you can possibly do it. It works really well in Airbnbs because you're now kind of living together for these 2 or 3 days or 4 days, however long you're together, and it creates more opportunities for casual discussion. So you can have formal discussions. We'll talk about that in a minute. You can bring in experts. We'll talk about that. But the casual conversations where we talk about, here are the things I'm concerned about, here are the things that are going in my practice or in my life, those make the biggest difference. In fact, one of the rules we'll talk about, number 7, which is financial undressing, came about during a casual conversation at one of our early masterminds. So rule number 5 that I go by is always meet over an adventure. Now, you can meet just to meet. In fact, our early masterminds, we used to rotate through an advisor's office. So we'd say, great, let's meet at my office. Let's go meet at Jamie's office. Let's meet at Micah's office. Let's meet at Matt Doherty's office. We would rotate through offices. And that worked well because we could see each other's office. But what happened is it got to be a little bit too formal. And the persons whose office it was often distracted by running their office or their family that was nearby, or even just the thought of going home to their own bed at night. And so at some point we shifted and said, let's go do an adventure. Let's find adventures that most of us or all of us are interested in doing it, and we'll build our mastermind around that. Let me give you some examples of that. We have done, we went to the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting once as our adventure. We've done helicopter hog hunting as our adventure. We've done skiing as our adventure. We've done stunt car driver school several times as our adventure. We've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as our adventures. We've done all sorts of different things, paintballing. They don't have to be expensive, right? They need to be something, ideally something physical, something that you all enjoy. One, to kind of make it a fun time, but it also builds camaraderie. For a mastermind to really work, you have to get past this sort of shell that we all have of professionalism, which is why a lot of industry conferences don't go well. We go to industry conferences and we're all trying to show off. We're all trying to show who's got the biggest practice or who's the smartest, whatever the case may be. But when we do an adventure together, some of that shell melts away because now we become friends versus just professional peers. Number 6, I alluded to this a minute ago. It's also very helpful to hire professionals. Now, there are all sorts of people in the industry, myself included, that you might say, hey, listen, I'd really love to have Jarvis and chat with him and ask him questions, but his fee is more than I can cover on my own, or I don't feel like I necessarily get that ROI on my own. Well, great news. If you have your mastermind, and I've done this several times for others and always in my masterminds, if there's 5 or 6 or 7 of you, you can split almost anyone's fee and it becomes a manageable amount. So we've split the fee for Michael Kitces, for John Lee Dumas, for Evan Carmichael, for all sorts of different coaches who otherwise would be prohibitively expensive. We schedule them for an hour or 2 hours of time, or depending on the person, even a day in person. And then we have that time to ask them all of our questions. It's a great way to cultivate discussion, to learn new things versus the 4 or 5 or 7 of us just sitting around kind of, saying nice things to each other. Number 7, this one is essential for masterminds to be a success. And this is what we call financial undressing. Now, this one we discovered by accident. And I won't divulge too many details because that will lay into rule number 10. But we were chatting one time and one of the advisors in our group kind of offhandedly commented how much money his spouse spends each month. Not like, oh, hey, a lot of money or a gazillion dollars, but the exact dollar amount that she had budgeted every single month. And it was not a small dollar amount. And when we all realized that he had said an actual number, like it was a real number, we all paused because it was some kind of social taboo. Like we don't talk about real numbers, right? We say, oh, our practice is doing really good and it's growing a lot and we have high profits and I spend a lot on marketing. Like we use these vague generalities, which means nothing. But once he said, hey, this was my specific number, suddenly the whole game changed. There was this level of vulnerability and transparency that had never existed. And so from that point on in all of our masterminds, we always start with financial undressing. And we found that this works best if you take those giant 3M Post-it notes, like big ones, and we write down, everyone writes down their name, that's not super crazy, where they're from, their gross revenue, their net revenue, their assets under management, their fee schedule, and a couple of other things depending on the focus for that session. Now, no round numbers are allowed on financial undressing. It has to be exact numbers because as soon as we start rounding numbers, they turn into fishing stories and 700,000 turns into 800,000, turns into 900,000, turns into $1.5 million, turns into a completely worthless number. Quick side rant. This is why I don't look at any industry studies because everyone lies intentionally or unintentionally about their numbers. Now, if you want to take financial undressing to the next level, and again, we do this in almost all of our masterminds, have everyone provide a copy of their profit and loss statement out of QuickBooks or whatever accounting software they're using, and a copy of their business and personal tax returns. Now, the interesting thing is most people have never shared their business and personal tax returns, let alone their P&L with anyone ever. In fact, they would probably tell more people about their proctology exam than they would about their financials. But by having sitting in a group of 5 or 10 advisors and everyone has a copy of my P&L and I say, oh, hey, I'm running at X profit margin. And someone says, hang on a second, I'm doing the math here And that's not your profit margin, which means that I was then telling myself a story that was not true about where my practice was at. It's also then we can have discussions around, I see you spent X on marketing, or I see you're paying your employees this, or your lease is this, or whatever the case may be. It lets us really dive in, and it lets me get perspective on my practice that I couldn't get in any other way. Because if I'm giving someone general advice, like, hey, you should run a profitable practice, that doesn't tell me what I should do tomorrow. But if someone's looking at my P&L and they're saying, hey, listen, you're spending X on your lease, that seems really high. You need to go back and renegotiate that lease and see if you can get that payment down. Whatever the case may be, having actual numbers makes a big difference. Number 9 on my mastermind checklist is you have to plan for attrition. You have to plan for attrition. Now, maybe this says more about me than about anybody else, but there's going to be attrition in every mastermind group. Some of this is because the group wasn't a good fit. Some of it's because priorities change. Some of it's because schedules change. Some of it's because people retire, whatever the case may be, but you're going to have attrition in your group. And so if my ideal group size is between 5 and 10, whenever I'm putting together a mastermind for me personally, I typically invite 10 to 15 different people that I know, assuming that 5 to 10 will be able to make it. Now, when I'm hosting masterminds, so not for my peers, but in my coaching program, we can easily run groups. Micah and I can run groups of 30 or 40 or even 50 advisors, but that's because he and I are there working full time to facilitate that event along with our team. And so we can run quite a bit larger mastermind than you could on your own. If it's you running it yourself, I would recommend no more than 5 to 10 people. There's all sorts of other things, by the way, at that size that you can plan depending on your budget. For example, like I mentioned, we always have an Airbnb. We always have it catered. It got to the point where we would always have an assistant on premise, not at our Airbnb, but in the same area, so that he or she could run and get us whatever we needed so we could spend the most time as focused as possible. But back to that rule number 9, people are going to drop out of your group, and that's fine. There will also occasionally be people that need to be disinvited, and that's fine too. I'll tell you some stories over beers one time of people we've had to disinvite from our mastermind. Rule number 10, or checklist item number 10 for the mastermind, everyone has to sign non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs. And we literally have everyone sign these for all of our events. Why? We need to be really transparent in these groups. Like, I really need to go through my finances. I need to talk to you about what's going on in my personal life, my family life, with my relationship with my spouse, whatever the case may be. And I can't have it be repeated anywhere else. And so I wish that like a gentleman's agreement or a handshake was good on this, but signed NDAs are required, that nothing that's spoken about in this mastermind can be repeated. Now, if you want to share in generalities, like I mentioned the example of, hey, one advisor shared how much his wife was spending each month, that's fine. But I'm never going to say, hey, I was in a mastermind with Micah and he told me this thing, because that is confidential information. And once the confidence or the confidentiality of the group has been breached, the group will quickly fall apart. Step number 11, and I alluded to this one earlier as well, I like to meet in person at least twice a year. 3 times is the sweet spot. 4 starts to become a little much just because it's a lot of time away from family, and I always need to be planning ahead for that. Now, in my masterminds, I'm typically the leader of the mastermind. It's just a role I've sort of taken on. And so I'm the one that's scheduling ahead, saying, hey, here's the dates, here's the venues, here's the activities we're going to do, here's where we're going to stay, here's where you need to arrive. All of those things, I'm taking care of all of the logistics. Now, as you hear this list of 11 things and you think, wow, that sounds like a lot of work, it is. It is a lot of work, which is why most people don't do them. Sort of like everything in life, if it's hard, most people don't do them. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, like I can point to a lot of transformations in my practice. Now, as I'm looking back down my list, I realized I skipped number 8, which I can't believe I skipped number 8, but maybe that makes for a good tease. Step number 8, and this all ties back to around perhaps the most important thing of the mastermind, is what we like to call extreme accountability. Now, we adapted this from Jocko Willick's extreme ownership. The idea of extreme ownership is that everything is yours to fix. The idea of extreme accountability is that anything can be accomplished. And here's how extreme accountability works, and I'll do a separate video on this. Extreme accountability works in that there are things that you know you need to do in your practice or in your life, but the fear of doing them has you paralyzed from taking action. Let's give a common example that comes out of our masterminds. Let's say we identify that you are undercharging several clients on their fees. You're undercharging based on the value that you're providing. Now, what you're telling yourself is, I would raise the fee, except that if I do, they will surely quit. They will fire me as their advisor. They will file a complaint. My other clients will also quit. And by the end of today, I'll be holding a sign, "Will Financial Plan for Food." Now, how did I know this was your concern? Because that's all of our concern. And so what extreme accountability would say, and I literally had this, my very first extreme accountability, I remember this so clearly, was with Micah. And I was going to do a fee increase. And I said, yeah, guys, I'll do the fee increase. I got it handled. And Micah, in his wisdom, he says, Jarvis, I know you'll do it. He says, you're a man of integrity. I know that you'll do what you said you'll do. But just in case something comes up, let's create a little, and this is where he came up with the term extreme accountability around this, that if by chance you don't, there's some stick that keeps you motivated. So here was the stick, my friends. For my first big fee increase, I had up to a deadline, and the extreme accountability was if I didn't do the fee increase, then I had to send a letter to my 10 best clients, my 10 most profitable clients, explaining to them that I was resigning from their accounts because there was a financial advisor in the world far superior to me. His name is Micah Shalansky, and that I recommended they transfer their assets to him, and I was doing the same thing as well. And so this letter was drafted up, addressed to my 10 best clients, and given to Micah to send if I didn't do my fee increase. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, Jarvis, this is absolute insanity, you're right. It is absolute insanity, but it works. And so I gave Micah these letters, and it was coming close to the deadline, and I was getting ready to chicken out of the deadline, and I call Micah, and I say, listen, Micah, I got this excuse, I got this reason. We're not going to do the fee increase after all. Micah says, Jarvis, it's no worries. I totally get that. I am going to, however, because I'm a man of integrity, mail these letters out at the deadline as promised, which I did not want to have happen, and so I did the fee increase. Now, we've since evolved the rules for extreme accountability, and I'll explain those in a different video because we want to make sure it doesn't benefit the person to whom you're doing the extreme accountability. Like, I don't want Micah to have an incentive for me to not deliver on my results. But these are the type of things, my friends, that come out of doing a mastermind. And so my action item to you, really my plea to you, is that you have to be part of a mastermind. If you want to go through these 11 steps and form your own masterminds, all power to you. If you want to join someone else's mastermind, I selfishly host several myself, a shameless plug there. You can do that. There are lots of people that host masterminds. You'll need to find one that's the right fit for you, ideally from a group that has achieved whatever level of success that you are looking to achieve next. But it's really critical that you do this. Now, if you found this video helpful, specifically if you're going to implement masterminds, in my book, I talk more about masterminds delivering massive value, which you can find in the link below. And until the next video, happy planning.